One. Oh,
all right.
It's not regular.
All right, hold on. Yeah, wait. What did you just say to me? Just say that again.
I said I wanted to start my day off with a normal cube.
Yeah.
So I decided to prioritize the regular cube. Unfortunately, it's anything but regular.
Actually, I don't think I can do that. Would you call it irregular? I'm not
Very irregular.
Target?
Not as powered as I thought it would be. I opened up a pack and it had 4 of the fetch land for the basic. I forgot what it's
Prismatic
called.
Vista.
Yeah, it had 4 prismatic vistas in the pack, and obviously that could be due to like bad shuffling, which it probably is.
I'll have you know that the designer of the regular cube also invented the method of shuffling everyone uses, so it's double his fault that there were 4 prismatic vistas in that pack.
Your words, not mine.
Sure. Allow me to welcome every single one of you listeners out there. That's right, all of you, including you, Matt. It's got to be a bunch of Matts.
At least 7.
Way more than 7, statistically, I would imagine. Anyway, this show goes out to you, Matt, and all the other listeners. This is another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony, coordinator of the group Order Maddox.
I do my best. It's a tough role to be the group order coordinator, but
especially when there's some language barriers and a lot of things sold out. But you know, it turns out when everything you order is just delicious meat, it's either meat on a skewer with a big pile of onions, or it's meat and onions inside of a fried dough.
The 2 food groups.
I mean,
as far
so
as I'm
good.
concerned. I think a good group order is it's about collaboration. You really gotta take the direction from the server. When they say, no, you need twice as much food, you listen to them.
Collaboration with the server, not with your fellow diners.
Nope. And when they say 2 orders of French fries, you forget.
They're not to be. Well, yeah, don't worry. I was going to make sure the French fries. Those are really good fries too.
They were good fries.
They were hand cut,
like,
and
legitimately.
you could tell,
They were not
out of an Ore-Ida bag,
Cisco.
or an Aramark. Aramark is the other one.
Bird's Eye. Quick, name all the French fry companies.
Aramark is just one of those. It's like the catering company that does everything. I'm sure they have some pipeline of whatever. They weren't Costco fries. They were good hand cut fries. I'm referring to a nice group lunch we had during the second day of Cubecon DMV, which we attended this weekend, and this is our recap episode for that event. We could have maybe thought ahead and tried to get Michael involved because, spoiler, Michael did fairly well in the event. We'll talk about that in more detail, but Patrick wasn't there. He's our go-to guest for Cube events when we have friends there that want to join us for the recap episode, so it's just you and I. I think these recap episodes have evolved a bunch over the years, and just to restate, I'm not particularly interested in going through every single Cube draft and talking about every single record. We'll probably mention them at least in passing. This is more about the moments of the weekend that I think were most interesting to us, and for me, a lot of things that are interesting as a cube designer, like observing in other people's cubes, observing in my own cubes, and just reflecting on what you can learn from a big Cube event like Cubecon DMV.
I mean, I was thinking the most interesting moment from the weekend is, maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but it involved a lot of pasta on a pizza.
Yeah, that wasn't in my notes, but I'm glad it's in your notes. I guess we should say this is one of the many local Cube events that you can possibly attend. I just added a bunch to the events page on our website, so if you go to luckypaper.co/community or /community/events, you can find all of the upcoming events that are all over the world. We have a couple in Mexico. We have one in Hobart in Tasmania, so that's kind of cool. So check that out if you want to join and go to attend a Cube event like this. This one was actually not that big. I mean, I think the cap was 254 or whatever, 256, whatever one of those is a multiple of 8, but the actual attendance was, I think, a little over 100, 120-ish. It seemed like we're in each flight. Actually, much closer to the normal small-scale grassroots Cube events that we normally attend. The main Cubecon is a very big event. There's a couple other larger ones, but for the most part, you're looking at somewhere between 60 and 120 for most of these local Cube events.
Yeah, and this was the first sort of satellite of the initial Cubecon that spawned, all these Cube events. But yeah, like you said, it did feel much more similar to a lot of the other events that have been happening over the last couple of years.
These events are all run with this software, Hedron Network, which is designed by Gwen Decker, the developer behind Cube Cobra. They're kind of essential to how these events run. It allows you to go in and look at all the cubes that are being played and sign up basically for a draft. And for that draft, you can choose which cubes you would like to play and which cubes you'd like to avoid. And then the matching algorithm, fills as many pods as it possibly can while giving people as much of their preferences as possible, which is a complicated coordination problem. You and I are famous for going into these events, mostly full random is what we call it, because we often have a lot of cubes that we've played before in the events. I'll try to ignore ones that are like local that I know I can play a bunch whenever I want, but we don't really go in with like a huge preference for what cubes we are actively trying to play. We just let the algorithm decide. I'd much rather, be part of filling out a pod that was maybe not going to fire or letting someone else have their preference than really have strong preferences myself in terms of what I play.
At this event, though, in particular, there were, because it was local, so many cubes that were from our local play group, or, honestly, even just because we're sickos and go to a lot of events, there are just things that I've played before, even if the cube owner wasn't super local. So I was not able to exclude as many as I wish I could have, so I could definitely put into something new. So maybe I should have actually done some ranking in retrospect.
I've considered that before, but then I just can't bring myself to choose because you get a limited number of rankings. Like, if you could rank every single cube that wasn't one of the ones that we have locally or have played a bunch before and then just like kind of randomize it or whatever. Here's the feature for you, Gwen. That I think there's like, hundreds of drafts between you and I that are in Hedron Network, which we are associated with. Put us lower in cubes that we've already played before, even at previous events, even not at the same event. There's an idea for you.
I'm sure Gwen is just excited to have more features to build.
Gwen loves features, and this feature would be really useful for all the people that attend
for both
6
of us.
to 12 to 30 cube events, but it would be pretty useful for us. To your point, we both went basically full random and ended up in a local designer's cube, the Metabolic Machine, in draft 1. Do you want to talk about your draft of Metabolic Machine, Anthony?
Sure. I'm actually not sure this is a local cube, but I'm not sure it's one that I have drafted before. I was kind of excited to play it. I ended up in a mostly like blue-red artifact deck. Lizard Blades was kind of one of the key pieces that was very effective against...
Anthony, how was your draft? I drafted Lizard Blades!
Lizard Blades, Traxos, a favorite of mine, Nettlecyst, like a bunch of these cards that are very exciting to me personally, but also some new cards that I'd never played with, in particular Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance. I feel like so often you go into a cube draft and you're like, oh, I have this like sick 2-card combo, and very often you don't get to do it.
Oh, say more about that.
Oh, really? You just always get to do your 2-card combos?
No, I'll talk about my draft in a second, but you keep talking.
Saheeli, the Sun's Brilliance, lets you copy a creature you control, but also turns it into an artifact, gives it haste, you sacrifice it in turn. Classic kind of card. But I also had Goblin Engineer, which lets you, it's like a... the other Goblin Welder.
It's like Goblin Welder, but for small artifacts, and also entombs an artifact on ETB.
So it's so cool that I got to use Saheeli to copy the Goblin Engineer, which then the copy was also an artifact with haste, so I got to sacrifice the Goblin Engineer itself, because normally it doesn't say other artifact, because why would it say that? That doesn't make sense. And that was like this really, really fun kind of value engine I get to build up. But mostly, I just was pretty aggressive with this deck, and won games with unblockable threats.
Yeah, this cube is designed by a local bud of ours who is a nutritionist, and it started as a cube that was built around food. The token.
Thing is, I think it was called like the food cube initially, but it was very much
the nutritious
not,
cube,
or the nutritious cube. But it was specifically designed not about just like lots of life gain and food. He wanted all these other synergies to happen, and I think that the recent rebrand is actually helping the way that people are setting expectations about this cube.
I think it's a really good rebrand. I'm a little biased because I helped Michael, brainstorm some names and come up with something idea. But yeah, it started as like about food and then became sort of more broadly about nutrition, which is obviously a much more complicated subject than just food, especially if you're a professional nutritionist. And the way that it plays is it is kind of like a mid-power level, like very synergistic environment that is very much about like building a little machine on your side of the battlefield. The thing you were doing with Saheeli and Goblin Engineer is very much what the cube is about. You're supposed to be like doing this kind of like little synergistic thing, and everybody's kind of doing similar little synergistic engines to create value and like, make little machines. So I think the new name is quite good. I've played this cube a number of times before on Friday mornings. Usually we don't have a full pod on Friday mornings, so it'd be like 6 of us or something. Pack one, pick one. I took Mirror Retriever out of a pack that didn't have a whole lot, and I knew there's a lot of artifacts floating around. I was like, cool, Mirror Retriever's fine. Pack one, pick two, I got Jeskai Ascendancy, and I know that this
cannot
cube,
help yourself.
I know that this cube supports Jeskai Ascendancy combo. It has like, a bunch of 0 mana non-creature spells. It has both Banishing Knack and Retraction Helix and other sort of ways to possibly go crazy with Jeskai Ascendancy. And not only do I know it's supported in the cube, but I know how to draft that deck. It is a deck in 100 Ornithopters. I feel like I know how that deck functions, how to draft it. I immediately got Retraction Helix, which arguably, if I was like being competitive, you could have argued that maybe I should have tried to wield the Retraction Helix, because in general, it is like not the highest power level spell. And now that I have a Jeskai Ascendancy, you know,
it's a very important piece for you. You really don't want to risk it.
That's how I felt. I was like, look, and there was, you know, obviously a like slightly better card on average, you know, power level in the pack. But for my deck, the best card was obviously going to be the Retraction Helix. And I ended up with what I thought was a very capable Jeskai Ascendancy deck. For those that don't know this combo, Retraction Helix and Banishing Knack are functionally identical. They give target creature the ability to tap to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So they're basically like a bounce spell that is a little worse than Unsummon because you have to have a creature to target, and they can obviously interact with it by interfering with that creature when you target it. But it's a little better than Unsummon because it can bounce more than just creatures. And Unsummon can only bounce creatures. We don't get Unsummoned for non-land permanent at just blue. At least we haven't yet.
Or maybe we have, and we just don't know about
well,
it.
Not
and
it's
called like
Boomerang Basics does it at sorcery speed, and it's a lesson.
It's called like Penne Pasta Pizza, and it was from the turtle set.
Well, no, to my point, I would know because I have designed cubes with this combo. Like I play, you know, this is a thing that I am interested in and have, you know, looked at all the cards for many times before. So basically what you do is you give a creature the ability to tap, bounce a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. You bounce one of your own, ideally 0 mana value, non-creature permanents, and then you replay it. The non-creature permanent triggers Jeskai Ascendancy, which gives basically all of your creatures a prowess trigger and untaps every creature you control, and also you loot. Which means that as soon as you have a creature that's not summoning sick, any 0 mana non-creature spell, Lotus Petal, in my case I had Chimeric Mass was one of the ones in my deck, and this Jeskai Ascendancy Retraction Helix, you just get to draw basically your entire deck. I mean, as many cards as you want to draw. Every creature you have in play becomes extremely large, and you also get to like find whatever spell you need. So I had a couple of like Reckless Fireweaver was in my deck, which kills without me having to get into combat. So even if like you have a huge board of chump blockers and I can't give my big creatures trample, I can just kill you with Reckless Fireweaver. I also had like a new Reckless Fireweaver from Edge Eternity's Weft something that I can't remember exactly what it was. Anyway, at the end of the draft, I was like, I think my deck is pretty good. Like, I have this infinite combo. I also got like a pretty late Tashar Ancestor's Apostle, and I was not really a Tashar deck because I didn't have a huge density of cheap creatures. I was playing a total of 11 creatures, I think, and all but 2 of them were cheap, so I had 8 or 9 cards to get back with Tashar.
But it's also presumably redundancy for some of your combo pieces, right?
Not really, because Tashar can't get back Jeskai Ascendancy or a thing to get it off, and it can't get back Banishing Knack or Retraction Helix. What it is it kind of works with some of the same stuff, because all the 0 mana non-creature spells are artifacts in this cube, which also trigger Tashar. I had Mirror Retriever, Mishra's Bauble. Those 2 alone with Tashar goes infinite in the sense that you put a bunch of infinite Mishra's Bauble triggers on the stack to draw a bunch of cards in your opponent's turn.
And presumably that also then with like the Reckless Fireweaver is
that would also with Reckless Fireweaver or the Weft, whatever, kill my opponent. I also had an Atog in my deck, which you can then use Atog to not have to have a self-sacrificing 0 mana. I guess I need the Atog with Mirror Retriever, because otherwise how the Mirror Retriever die? Atog has to be involved.
Okay.
Atog has to be involved. Look, the point is I had like a couple, I think, very solid Jeskai Ascendancy combo lines with redundancy. I had a couple of more ambitious but very possible Tashar combo lines, and it was all strung together by good removal spells. And this is where like my knowledge of the cube, I think, helped me quite a bit. I got a pretty late Pyrrhic Strike, which is this white spell that has Blight, and it has a bunch of modes, and it's often referred to friendly. In our local playgroup, we call it the white K command, because you get to very often 2 for 1 your opponent in exchange for having that Blight trigger. There's a lot of artifacts and enchantments floating around, so you get to like, double disenchant or like disenchant, kill a big creature. So like I got some of these removal spells late, and I felt like my deck kind of had everything I needed. However, it just completely fell flat on its face. I could not draw my cards in the right order in a single game. I never comboed off with any of my various combo engines. I won one game that I won just by removing all my opponent's stuff and them scooping to being demoralized and assuming that because I had 4 cards in hand and they were top decking that I was for sure going to win. And I was going to win that game, to be fair. I was like 1 piece away from comboing off at that point. But I didn't get to. They just conceded. Just did not draw the cards in the right order. And still reflecting on it, I don't know if I just purely got unlucky and it actually was a perfectly fine deck, and that's just variance and that's how Magic works. I don't know if what I really needed was more like card selection and card advantage. That is maybe the one thing I didn't have a lot of. I was basically relying on, well, all my cards are part of combos or removal. And so like either I'll be removing my opponent's stuff or I'll be comboing off. And so often I had like Tashar and Jeskai Ascendancy, and it's like, these cards don't really do anything together. One other thing I was kind of missing was ways to deal with small, non-artifact or enchantment creatures. I had removal spells for big creatures, and I had tons of removal for artifacts and enchantments, and the things that got me were like Ursahili. I was like, I can't kill Sahili because it's not an artifact or enchantment, and it doesn't cost 3 mana value or greater. That just ended up being like a big hole for me. I lost to some flyers, and yeah, in our games, I had lost to, you had a big value engine, I just couldn't stop.
And I also just had a bunch of like unblockable stuff that it's like, yeah, your plan was to kind of like draw out the game in order to get to your combo. And I'm just like, yeah, you can't block because I have these unblockable creatures.
Yeah, even with your huge value engine, I could have maybe won the game if I could have just chump blocked for a long time.
Right.
Which with Tashar and my various things, I could have generated a lot of chump blockers because I did keep the Mirror Retriever in my deck. So I was like, Mirror Retrievering, getting back stuff, chump blocking. Like I could have theoretically bought time, but I had a Perilous Mirror and a Tashar sitting in play. And you were just like, well, everything I have is unblockable. You're like, I'm killing you with Gingerbrute and Surge Engine or Surge Node or whatever.
Surge Engine is kind of cracked. That was definitely the card that first put me into this deck.
So at a good time, I'm happy to lose trying to Jeskai Ascendancy combo. That's, it's on brand for me.
All right, so round 1, you were 0-3, right?
Yeah, which...
It's going to happen sometimes.
Not to Jane, apparently. I was telling you over the weekend that I was talking to Jane recently, and Jane just happened to let slip in conversation, like, I've never 0-3 to cube drafts. And I was like, what is wrong with you? That's really offensive.
I was 2-1. I lost to my first round opponent, but then did manage to win my next 2 matches, which made me feel a little better.
I know your second draft of the weekend was Take 5, which is my cube that was in the event. Again, you couldn't exclude things, so you ended up in yet again another local cube.
Yeah, and I played this once before, and it's not necessarily a cube that I feel very confident in because there's a lot of weird interactions between cards that you kind of have to know and understand to really get the best value out of them. At the same time, I'm excited about the fact that it is a cube where everybody's kind of going to be playing these sort of janky decks, so finding these weird edges is going to be like a puzzle everybody's doing together. I really struggled in this draft. Where did I even start? I took an Emery very early and was like, okay, I'm going to try and go in on this like artifact type deck.
Definitely one of the best cards in the cube, I would say.
It seemed like it. And I also was like, okay, well, if everybody's kind of doing these janky things, here's a Ret 2 Mystic. This is just a 2-mana 2/1 flyer. Maybe I'm just going to cast this and attack my opponent 10 turns while they're trying to do their janky thing.
That happens a lot.
That didn't really pan out. I did have some cool interactions between cards in my deck. I did sit down and just pepper a judge with a couple questions to try and understand my deck beforehand. In particular, how does God Pharaoh's Gift work with the Mimeoplasm? How does Saw in Half work with the Mimeoplasm? How does Saw in Half work with Precursor Golem? That one's good. Major thumbs up. The one that was really tricky was Saw in Half plus Cosmogoyf, which you were very confident in what the interaction was here.
I was not very confident. I did say
99% confident.
I think I said 80, and you should call a judge to confirm. I want to talk about this one because there was a lot of interesting judge calls around this cube this weekend, and this one, I happened to be standing over your shoulder because I finished one of my rounds early and was just watching you play. You were like, what happens when I do this? For those that don't know, Saw in Half destroys a creature and makes 2 copies of it that have the exact same rules text, big asterisks, but half the power and half the toughness rounded up each time.
So it saws in half the creature.
It's very
does what it says on the tin.
You saw it in half, you get 2 of the same creature, but just half the size. And Cosmogoyf is a Tarmogoyf or a Lurgoyf that is star +1, power and toughness, and star is equal to the number of cards you own in exile. I thought that what would happen here is you would saw it in half, and because it would still have the same rules text of, star +1 equal to the cards you own in exile, you would just get 2 full-size Cosmogoyfs from the interaction. I thought I was reasonably confident, but we called a judge over to confirm, and the judges came over, thought about it, looked at their phone, thought about it some more, called another judge over, thought about it, looked at his phone, and eventually the judges ruled that you actually just get 2 0-1s, and their justification for this was that there is a ruling specifically on Saw in Half that says that it does not copy characteristic defining abilities that define power and toughness, which is really confusing to me because, Saw in Half says you get a copy of the creature, except its power and toughness is this. The except its power and toughness is this means that if it has an ability that specifically characteristically defines its power and toughness, which is different than saying this creature gets +1/+1 for each whatever you control, the star specifically is unique. For those who don't know, that means that that creature has that power and toughness even in your graveyard, even in your hand, even in your library. Those abilities are explicitly not copied by Saw in Half. So the ruling was you get 2 0-1s.
Regardless of how many things I have in exile.
Regardless of how many things you have in exile. I was like, that's a bummer. That's kind of not how I want that to work. And is, an interaction that had opportunity to be cool and is actually just not cool. And I was talking about it with some other players and we were thinking about it more and we were like, that doesn't really make sense though, because, okay, Saw in Half doesn't copy characteristic defining abilities, which means that you're essentially getting 2 vanilla creatures after Saw in Half. But why doesn't it reference the last known power of Cosmogoyf to still set the power and toughness equal to half and half rounded up each time? I ended up going back to the judge, who was not doing anything at the time, and I was just like, hey, I'm just curious.
I went back to the judge, but like in a cool way.
Well, I would never interrupted, his work if he was in the middle of like doing a ruling or something, but I was like, hey, I'm not part of this game. It doesn't matter. I'm just a cube owner, and I want to know for my own, clarity, like, why is it not work this way? This seems like it would also be a perfectly reasonable way for it to work based on the rulings. That judge then further talked about it and came back to me like 20 minutes later and was like, I have consulted with many other judges, and now we are almost certain that is in fact how it works. So you heard it here first, hopefully. If you saw in Half a Cosmogoyf, you get 2 creatures that have no abilities. They do not have the ability that sets their power and toughness equal to cards you own in exile, but they do have power and toughness equal to half the original targeted Cosmogoyf's power and toughness rounded up each time.
Right, so the fact that Saw in Half declares what is the size of this creature overrides the fact that there is this characteristic defining ability. Very weird, interesting. I don't know, I ended up 1-2. I definitely had some like fun moments with, part of my plan was using Emery and engineered explosives to just try and control the board, and I got to do a little bit of that. I got to Isochron Scepter a Tainted Pact for value. I think I definitely could have built a better deck, as you pointed out, specifically like leveraging Tainted Pact, and I definitely passed up on a Doomsday and a Laboratory Maniac, and could have like leaned harder into some of those game plans.
That's a tough deck to draft though. Like, you gotta be the right kind of sicko for that.
And it's the kind of like specific deck knowledge that I'm talking about, where it's like, I just don't really know how to do that. I'm much more like heuristics based. Is this a better 2-mana creature than this one? Is kind of the magic that I succeed at more. But still had some fun moments. I did get to Saw in Half the Precursor Golem on turn 5 of turns when I was a game behind.
That's a lot of golems.
Which is a little bit of a bummer, but I get to say I did it. So that was cool. My first opponent, Cole, had this really sick eggs deck that I was sad you weren't right there to see that game, because you would have really appreciated. I think at some point he had 5 Mishra's Baubles triggers to resolve on my upkeep, because he was just able to like cycle so many things with.
Cool turn you're taking. Can I draw 5 cards during it?
So yeah, it was fun to see the things that people were able to do, and hopefully I can do them next time I'm in this cube.
I think it's really interesting to hear your description of how the cube works. And like, oh, it's got these specific card interactions, which is similar to how you used to describe the Degenerate Micro Cube, where you were like, this card doesn't really do what it says on it. It has like this secret mode. You kind of have to know, like, oh, you're supposed to combine it with this to like get value out of it or whatever. I hear that, and I think it's valid. And
it's not as extreme
and your feelings
as
are valid.
The Degenerate Microcube, but
what I will say is that your feelings are valid, and also I want this cube to be the kind of cube where that's not really how it works, because I don't include most of the things that are like what you would have from prior knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. Which is something I have to be careful about setting expectations about, right? There's a Lion's Eye Diamond here. There is not an RX Salvagers, because I don't want you to have to know, like, oh, Lion's Eye Diamond is an RX Salvagers card. I want you to see Lion's Eye Diamond and think, how can I do anything with this card? And that's how I kind of want all of the interactions to be, right?
In our pod, the answer was, I don't know. I'm going to let Lion's Eye Diamond go 15th pick.
Sometimes that happens, and that's just fine. And sometimes you're kind of like, well, I actually am kind of forced to play it anyway. At least it's a 0-mana spell for, I can pick it up with Paradox or Paradoxical Outcome, so that's something, So it's interesting to like think about how to set expectations about this cube, because I don't really want to heavily favor players that like no constructed combos, like I think the Degenerate Microcube absolutely did, because I don't include those kinds of like hallmark combos. I include either ones that are so bad you've never seen them in constructed, so you couldn't possibly have prior knowledge about it, and it's also kind of bad so that like it's not the one thing you're meant to do with the card, because it's not that good. So it's a combo, but like, you wouldn't be like, well, I only play Dreadnought if I get Stifle, because I don't have Stifle. I don't have Dress Down. You play Dreadnought so you can fling it, or you play Dreadnought so you can exile it with Verol's the Scar Striped, our new favorite card to mention on the podcast.
Another one of my opponents discovered that mid-game. He was like, okay, I'm going to cast Dreadnought. It goes to the graveyard. 1 mana, here's Verol's. Please die.
That's my favorite. That's the moment I want this cube to be.
And then I got to learn that Verol's has another ability which regenerates it, so I was very, very dead.
Yes. That's the moment I want this cube to sort of capture. I think it is happening sometimes, but I do think some players look at it and think, oh, I probably have to know all these like secret combos to like make any sense of this cube. Like, Doomsday stuff, I don't have all the stuff that is like from constructed Doomsday piles. I don't have Get Probe, I don't have Gush, or like all these other cards that are known for like, well, here's where you put your Doomsday piles. You have to like actually figure it out yourself from like the cards you can possibly get a hold of. So just an observation of where my goals are maybe falling a little short.
This cube overall also had some challenges in the context of a cube event.
Okay, fine. Let's talk about it now. We'll get to my draft in a second, but during my second draft, I was in round 2, and a judge pulled me aside and said, like, "You're Andy, right?" And I was like, "Uh-oh." And they were like...
Getting called to the principal's office.
They were like, "Unfortunately, we're going to have to pull Take 5 from the event because it's taking too long," which... genuinely a little heartbreaking because I attend a lot of cube events. I have YouTube videos about the entire design process of this cube. The step of me putting a card on Cube Cobra has always happened on coverage, essentially, for these YouTube videos. So, I mean, dozens of hours of me talking through designing this cube from scratch. So people know about it, and I want to be able to bring it to events. That's a part of why I designed it. I was aware that this was a danger of the cube's conceit. It's a complicated cube. There's a lot of weird rules and interactions. It's a desert cube that you have to draft all your lands, which means that your mana base is kind of complicated. You have to think about your mana in every game, which is not always true in every other cube. And I was kind of disappointed to hear that this was the case and immediately already thinking all right, I got to figure out if I can go back to the drawing board and make the cube faster without undermining the central conceit. Because I want it to be the cube where you realize mid-game, oh, I can just play Dreadnought and let it die because I have no way to stifle that trigger and then just exile it to Virals or, get it back with Goblin Welder and, mill my opponent out with Altar of Dementia, just sacrificing it in response to its own sacrifice trigger every single time. That's the stuff I want you to realize mid-game, and that's a lot of thinking, and that just takes time. What I will say is that in our local playgroup, this cube has been actually one of the faster cubes we played. There's no deck building, essentially. You cut 5 cards, nobody has to get basic lands out of the basic land box, very few tokens, so usually we're the first ones to get to matches, and the matches tend to take about as long as every other cube at Cube Night, but this cube tends to end earlier. I think a lot of that is just, we're very casual and chill on Cube Night. I mean, some people know the cube a little better, but honestly, a lot of people don't. It's more that just I think at Cube Night, most people are just yeah, I got my deck, I'm going to try and do my thing, and I'm not going to think about every possible card interaction with the cards in my hand and cards in play and try and evaluate everything. Whereas at a cube event, people are, for better or worse, in general, trying a little harder. There are stakes in the sense that there are rankings. There's a top 8.
Most importantly, a pin if you 3-0.
And a pin if you 3-0. And I think sort of that context just makes people take their time a little more and causes the cube to be dragged out a little bit. We'll talk more about that, but I was bummed. I was really bummed when the judge staff told me they had to pull it. I was like, dang. People had been telling me, yeah, I'm excited to play it. I keep ranking it, and now I knew they weren't going to get to do it. And I was just like, dang, that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I wonder if one of the effects that actually takes the most time is things that care about what's left in your library. I feel like in my matches and overhearing some matches, there were a couple points where people are just okay, now I need to think. I mean, I had Fiend Artisan in my deck, and it's what else can I do with this? And that is a kind of situation in a game that can eat up some time.
Even going back to our Metabolic Machine draft, we hit a point in our games where you were just not bothering to entomb with your copies of Goblin Engineer, which is absolutely wrong.
Shut up. It was right.
No. Maybe it was right if you take into account the, we have to finish this match in time, and
yes.
If you go to turns, you might not win.
But also, you draw a removal spell, and it's okay, now I have no other way to get these cards back, and my deck is all lands.
I don't know. It feels like it'd be really hard for that to ever be correct to me, but to your point, okay, maybe there's a small edge of putting another thing in there you can maybe have access to next turn or whatever, but you're it's not worth it. The small edge is not worth it. I'm just going to not do that anymore. There's some point where you have to have that kind of mentality, I think, or otherwise these cubes can take a really long time. And yes, I think Fiend Artisans and, I have a couple transmute cards in this cube that people have told me, hey, they're really cool, but also I, need to get in the headspace of before the draft starts, just, taking a picture of all of my things I can transmute for 2. Take a picture of all my 2 drops, just so I can, reference it mid-game and know, what I possibly have left to get. There's a lot of things to think about. And I'm probably going to do a video, I'm definitely going to do a video, just specifically about how to address some of the concerns about the game speed and match speed in that cube. So I imagine by the time this episode comes out, that video will probably already be out. So check it out on the YouTube channel.
The last cool moment I will share from my draft here was I was very excited to cast Precursor Golem with the Saw in half the next turn. Not in turns, when I was actually going to win this way. And then my opponent very cleverly read the card a couple times and said, great, I threaten your Precursor Golem.
Yep.
And I did not survive that turn.
Precursor Golem is really powerful. I mean, it's 9 power across 3 bodies for 5 mana, which is a really good rate. And all the upside of getting to copy your own combat tricks and stuff makes it even better. But it also can be cleanly answered by almost every removal spell because it just copies it and removes all of them. And it has all these other cool moments of oh, now I deal 9 to you and I'll take your Precursor Golem. Or I'll cast my Fist of Flame targeting your Precursor Golem, outside of combat. And now I just draw up 3 cards. So that's cool for me.
Smart.
It's been a cool card in the list.
So I ended up 1-2, not a great showing, but had some cool moments, which I think is kind of what you hope from this cube.
My second draft of the day, once again, full random, was the Jarvis Yube. A really good name. It's Jarvis Yube's cube. It is a pretty typical Legacy, vaguely Power Max list. I will say it is mostly older cards. It probably, I mean, not like old, like I'm talking like, it doesn't have a lot of cards from the past 5 years, call it. It's got a lot of like old staples of, vintage cube from years past, some newer cards mixed in, but like I didn't have to read almost any card, which was nice. And if I were to play a like actual Power Max cube these days with all the Universes Beyond and like, supplemental set cards, I would have to read a lot of them. Here I knew basically every card in the entire list. I thought it was pretty tastefully put together. I think a good density of all the various effects. Maybe a little high curving for my taste. I was playing a mono white deck. I forget the draft. I could look at my draft order, actually. I specifically take my pool pictures in draft order. Yeah, so my draft order was Pack 1, Pick 1, Retrofitter Foundry, into Lion Sash, into Extraction Specialist, into Faceless Haven, into Kithian, and just stayed mono white the entire draft. I'm not gonna lie, part of this was that I thought it was open, but part of it was also that I spent the morning trying to do some extremely big brain Jeskai Ascendancy Tashar combo lines, and I just completely fell flat, and I was like, I'm going to fall back on attacking my opponent with power and toughness. And I did, to great effect, and got the 3-0-6-0, and it was pretty clean. There are a couple of interesting moments here. I will say that for the 3-0-6-0 mono white aggro deck, it was not like the games were not interesting. Most of my games did have a lot of interesting decisions on both sides of the battlefield. I, had a lot of card advantage in, like, I had both copies of Theorbid Inspector and Novice Inspector. I had a Stoneforge Mystic with a Stoneforge Mystic package, a couple of other, like, value engine-y things, some, like, minor sort of flicker synergies. I wasn't, like, full all gas, like 10 1-drops aggro. I was kind of like mono white, aggressive mid-range, and there was definitely like a lot of board states that were kind of interesting and forced me to think really hard, and I appreciate that about aggro decks, and I don't subscribe to the mentality that playing aggro is brain dead. The finals were particularly interesting. I was playing Joe of World Championship Cube, of Kamigawa Time Spiral block, weird cube, and doesn't he have one more cube?
The Saga's Cube?
The Saga's Cube, thank you. Brooding Saga. Joe's a good player. I played against him before, and honestly, his deck was, I think, better than mine in the finals. He had a, like, base green, splashing a couple of colors deck that was just, like, power outliers galore. I've got, like, Uro and Grist and, just a bunch of ramp and, like, tons of card advantage. Game 1, I kind of had a perfect curve out, and it was close, but I did get there because I like had everything just like exactly when I needed it. Game 2, I sided out of a lot of my more aggressive stuff because I was like, my small creatures are going to get stonewalled by like a ton of just beefy mid-rangey threats in this cube. It's kind of like the Nightwear matchup for like a true aggro deck. It was just like, all your threats are big, they're bigger than my threats, and I didn't have a ton of removal. I think I had enough, but not like enough that I could reliably remove all my opponent's blockers. Like, that's not what my game plan is going to have to be. I needed to trade in combat to advance my game plan. So I sided out of some of my more aggressive stuff, and I brought in Wormcoil Engine, Sun Titan, and Lyra Dawnbringer, and a land. Cut like 4 dinky little 1-drops or like really aggressive 2-drops, and instead added a 17th land, 2 6-drops, and a 5-drop. All of which, well, the 5-drop and Wormcoil Engine gain a ton of life. And our second game, I felt vindicated by my sideboarding strategy because what happened was I did not have my absolute perfect curve out start. Instead, Joe got out to a more quick start than I did, and very quickly just started generating way more card advantage than I could ever possibly keep up with. And I was basically on chump blocking duty. I was like, I'm going to play my Novice Inspector, I'm going to chump block with it, I'm going to play my Extraction Specialist and get back my Novice Inspector, I'm going to chump block with it again. Then I'm going to ephemerate my Extraction Specialist and get back my Novice Inspector and chump block with it again. And at some point, I think I had 5 clues that I just had sitting there and no time to crack because I was just too busy playing cards to chump block. I felt okay though because I was like, my game plan here is basically to deck you. Like, you are like drawing 3 to 4 cards a turn with your Uro and your, Beast Whisperer and all of your cantripping creatures. And I have removal spells if I need to like remove something that has trample or like is a win condition that doesn't involve getting into combat, or a big flyer, but he was base green, so I wasn't worried about flyers that much. But I can generate so many chump blockers on the ground that I also have all this life gain in my deck. And that's exactly what happened. I, stabilized eventually. I don't think I ever attacked this game. That's not true. I think I did attack.
You must have been attacking with Lyra for all that life gain, right?
I didn't actually draw Lyra in this game at this
time.
Lyra
so what was all the life gain from? Just Wormcoil Engine?
It was from Extraction Specialist, which is a 3/2 with lifelink that I got back many times as it died. I also also had Kitchen Finks, and I also had the White Adversary, which is a 3-1 with lifelink. I gained a fair bit of life. It was mostly about just like, I'm chump blocking forever. The cube design lesson for me, which is one I've learned on many of my cubes, is that like, I think cards that are appealing to many cube designers who are necessarily very invested Magic players when they're designing their green sections are often like, well, I want to be like generating card advantage. I want these like various mole drifters that are good against removal and like, good against the control decks or whatever. We laid out the pools afterwards, and Joe had no flyers and no trample. And I was just like, I think we could play a ton of games of this matchup, and you're like, your cards are better, your deck is better, you've got more powerful stuff going on, you can draw more cards, but like, I'm just going to make 17 Threadbit Inspectors and, gain a fat chunk of life, and I don't think you can ever win.
Trample is an important keyword.
I mean, it's funny because I think just like big dumb guy with trample is the kind of thing that like a lot of cube designers are like, boring. It's just like dice to removal or whatever. I probably would have really struggled against Colossal Dreadball. No joke. Like, I did not really have that many removal spells, and a 6/6 with trample would have been a problem. It's just funny that I think if you're not really conscious of that as a cube designer, you can end up in those situations where it's just like, okay, you didn't include the one thing that like green is kind of known for because you were like, let's be clear, I'm glad Uro doesn't have trample. It's more balanced for not having trample, but like, I actually did eventually remove Uro, which I thought was a really kind of cool line where I had a Lion Sash, but Joe had a Grist in play and an Uro, and I could have traded with Uro on blocks, but if I did, then I was just going to get escaped again immediately. And if I were to play Lion Sash, then Joe would just use Grist's ability to kill the Lion Sash before getting into combat to protect Uro. So what I did was
You have to equip the Lion Sash so Grist can't kill it.
That is another thing that I could have done, which is much...
Okay.
Yeah, that would have also worked, and it's probably much more clean. What I did was way more big brain.
Way cooler.
Which is I kept the Lion Sash in hand, blocked, killed Uro in combat, and then at the end of combat, I flashed it in with Stoneforge Mystic to exile the Uro before his second main phase. It felt very cool. I guess, like, there's maybe some arguments to that line still being preferable because it's, like, hidden information. Then, if he has instant speed or removal spell, he can't, double remove the creature that it's equipped to and the Lion Sash itself. Anyway, I did eventually remove Uro, and at the end of the game, I was like, I shouldn't have. Like, you would have died sooner because you would have just drawn more cards. Like, It didn't actually matter at all. Anyway, interesting cube design observations. I think mono white in many very powerful cubes just has everything you need. I had enough card advantage and like board generating card advantage to like go along with this deck. I had removal, I had threats. Like you can get it all in mono white that it's very hard to justify, I think, going to another color.
Congrats on your 3-0. I'm a little bit jealous. I would rather be in an 0-3 and 3-0 situation too, but I'm just over here with a 2-1 and a 1-2.
Very polarized lately. For years, I was like mostly a 2-1 player and, with the occasional 1-2 or 3-0, and now I feel like I am all over the place, and I'm getting more 3-0s and also more 0-3s. I don't know what that means.
Progress?
It's different. I don't know if it's progress. Any other observations on day 2, or day 1 rather, before we get to day 2?
Only if you want to talk about the pasta pizza.
Look, this event is in Pikesville. In the early days of the event, I think they were still like deciding on the name, and I felt very strongly like you can't call this Cubecon Baltimore under any circumstances because it's in Pikesville. And for those that don't know, Pikesville is just a suburb of Baltimore. It's, around the ring road, the like ring highway that goes around Baltimore, and it is, 25-minute drive from the city. It's like you can't hold something in Secaucus and call it Cubecon New York. Like that's just not how it works. Not walkable. Very few good restaurants. I would say the place we found the second day was pretty good.
Yeah, good tip from Joe.
Day 1, we just looked at some things and had decent reviews. Ended up walking a half mile, but across, multiple highways to get to Good Guys New York Pizza Kitchen or whatever. There's like 4 of us, and we just should get 2 big pies. So like, you go ahead and order. Like we're all good with whatever. So I get a pepperoni pie, and I looked at it. One of my favorite pizzas to get is I love vodka sauce. I love a vodka sauce, just cheese pizza. I think it's like a god tier pizza, to be perfectly honest.
Interesting. I don't know if I've ever noticed that on a menu before.
It is kind of a New York thing. Credit to the pizza restaurant, which was obviously not as good as New York pizza, but it did kind of have what I consider to be New York staples on the menu. So I see vodka pizza, and I'm like, great, vodka pizza. But it was penne vodka pizza, which my brain didn't even clock.
You read out loud, and we all heard it and said, really? But maybe this other option? And you were like, no, this is the one for us.
No, that's not true. No one said maybe this other option.
It's not how I saw things.
Check with the stenographer. Everyone just let me do this. And it turned out that this pizza was covered in pasta, and I was covered in shame. And I've been being clowned on it for days, and I just deserved it.
It was extremely worth it. It was very funny when the pizza it was just like a big plate of pasta with crust underneath it.
It was so dense,
very dense. We all were very well fed. Yeah, it was good.
So highlights from day one for me, obviously it's fun to win. It's nice to get the 3-0 and feel a little vindicated after 0-3 in the morning. And I thought it was cool. I liked all the sort of judge conversations I had about like rulings in Take 5. I will say that I was pretty bummed that it was being removed from the event, and that was definitely like hanging over me a little bit. So we go into day 2, and once again, I'm full random, and I get put into Take 5 because the staff forgot to actually do the thing they said they were going to do and did not remove it from the event, which is...
Oh, it got taken off your remove list?
I didn't even have it on the remove list.
Right.
Again, like we handpicked 10 cubes for this event, so there were 10 cubes that were local that I've played before, plus others that I've played at other events. I didn't even bother to set my 4 ignores, because like, how do you decide which 4 you're going to ignore? I just got random into Take 5. I'm happy to play my cube at an event, to be honest. I feel like it's the best way to learn as a cube designer is like to play your cube, and getting to play it with new people that are not the same people you've played with before is a really good learning experience. So like, I'm not like avoiding my own cubes at events necessarily. Yeah, random in Take 5. And it's weird. I really want to know what exactly happened, because multiple people reported to me that they wanted to rank it for draft 2 on day 1, and then it wasn't in Hedron Network, which implies to me that after draft 1, maybe they had like already decided to remove it, and like half removed it, like maybe removed it from the rankable ones, but enough people had already registered for the event with it ranked that it like still fired. And then they forgot to remove it and added it back in, and then it was in Hedron Network again, and then we fired it and drafted it again. And I will say, in this draft, did not go to time. Technically, I had one match that went to time that I just conceded to my opponent instead of drawing, because who likes to draw? But other than that, everyone was just done their matches in time, and the judging staff was like, oh, went great this round. And I'm like, cool, awesome.
Problem solved.
Problem solved, I guess. I ended up drafting a like Esper control deck that I was pretty excited about, not because I thought it was strong, because I was like, this is like some of the cool stuff I want to be doing in this cube. I had my Squee Ret2 Mystic combo, I had Hacken Nameless Inversion, I had Step Through to then cycle for other parts of my combos. I had a kind of weird Tameshi that didn't have a whole lot to get back, but Tameshi is just so good that, it just fits in so many different decks. And a lot of removal spells to try and like control the game until I got to the point that I could win. I lost round 1 pretty handily to Max, our local player. Max is like, he has the right brain for this cube. We've referenced Max before as our board stall enjoying player. And I think he's just really good at drafting, like, kind of like Sam Black style. Like, my deck has inevitability and like tons of card advantage, and I'm just going to like grind. And I did not have enough tools to stop the grind of Max's deck, and neither of our games were particularly close, but it wasn't even like anything flashy happened. He just kept generating advantage, and I was like, oh no.
The value.
He did immediately exile my Squee in my Squee Ret2 Mystic loop, which would have allowed me to keep up on card advantage, but instead I could not. Round 2, I am a little frustrated because I punted a whole game. I punted the whole match. I won game 1, and game 2 I could have won. We talked about this in the car, and I think it's interesting, another cube design lesson. I had Demonic Embrace in my deck, which is 1 black for an aura that gives +3/+1 and flying. And you can also cast it from your graveyard by paying 3 life in addition to its mana cost. So I can kind of keep coming back repeatedly at a pretty steep life loss. At the board state we were on, I was at 2 life. And I had this card in my graveyard, and I had just written it off. Like, obviously, I can't bring this back. I don't have 3 life to pay. I don't have life gain in my deck because I don't have a lot of life gain in most of my cubes. So I just kind of written it off as, like, not an option. But it was an option because I did have Tameshi in play. And I could have just used Tameshi to put it back on a creature, and it would have just been an obvious, like, swing for lethal, you're just dead. And what I was saying in the car, which I think is so interesting, is that if Demonic Embrace did not have the ability to be cast from the graveyard, I for sure would have seen that line. Like, if it was just an aura that gave a big buff, I would have been like, oh, great, bring back my big buff aura with Tameshi, attack, win the game. But because specifically it cares about being in the graveyard and, like, is active from the graveyard, I had already, like, processed it in my brain. It's like, all right, there's my graveyard matters thing, but it's, like, irrelevant because I can't pay that 3 life. And it's just funny how, like, those heuristics, like, overlapped and caused me to, like, miss this obvious onboard way to win game 2. Then I lost game 2, and game 3, we, like, went to turns, and I was probably going to lose, and I just conceded because I don't want to, I'm just not going to take a draw in a cube match ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good example of this kind of like mental mistake where it's like you shortcutted, this is no longer an option because I don't have the life to pay, and that just like not only cuts off that line, but then cuts off other things you could have done with that card. I feel like this happens in less obvious ways to me all the time.
Yeah, it was funny, and then I was just like, I realized a turn later, like, I could have just brought it back with the mana instead of with the ability instead of the life. So That's a bummer. Cool ruling from this pod.
More cool rulings.
More cool rulings from
card,
Take 5.
Or this cube never fails to deliver on cool rulings.
Final Fortune is in this cube. Red, instant. Take an extra turn after this one. At the end of that turn, you lose the game. Undoubtedly cool. There's a lot of like weird ways to stifle that trigger in this cube, but it mostly gets played honestly just fairly. You just are like, I can win if I attack again, so I'm going to do that. In this particular draft, a player asked me, they're like, do you know how this rules interaction work? And they showed me that with Eater of Days, which skips your next 2 turns. And I was like, I don't think that works the way you want it to. I assume the way Final Fortune works is that, like, you basically have a delayed trigger to lose the game at the beginning of your next end step, whenever that next end step is. But a judge came over and ruled, and I think it actually specifically says in the rulings for Final Fortune that if you somehow skip the extra turn, you never have that lose the game trigger go on the stack. So if you play Final Fortune and then Eater of Days, you skip your next 2 turns. One of those turns was the extra turn you got from Final Fortune. So your opponent does still get 2 consecutive turns, but that's 1 less turn they would normally get if you played Eater of Days. And you never have to worry about the lose the game clause because it was in the turn that is now lost to time that you skipped, which I think it's just cool. Not even that powerful, but just cool.
Halfway negate the downside of Eater of Days.
Something happens a lot in this cube, maybe we've talked about before, is that some people just like, I didn't draw my way to like negate the downside of Eater of Days. I guess I just play it, and their opponents are often like...
Turns out like the balance of 2 turns versus, what is it, a 9-8 trample?
9-8 flying trample.
Yeah. Just can, in fact, win games.
It just wins games that way, especially because you do it and then your opponent's like, well, I don't have attacks now. Like, you have a 9-8 flying trample for these 2 extra turns, so unless I have a removal spell, I probably don't have good attacks, and then I got to deal with this thing on the crackback. So I really like that a Fair Eater of Days has, like, done quite a bit of work here.
Also just such a cool-looking card.
So cool. Perfect Take 5 fodder. I did not play very well. It didn't go that well in terms of my record, but I had a good time. My deck functioned. Most of my games were close, save for my first match against Max. My games in match 2 and 3 were quite close and interesting. People's decks were doing the cool things, and also we didn't go to time. So I was like, great, cube's fixed.
Problem solved. My third draft was, what is this called? The World Championship Museum. This is one of Joe's cube where everything is gold border from specifically the World Championship deck. So it's like a bunch of the best decks from a certain era of Magic shuffled together. And it's interesting, this is also similarly a
breaking
place where...
Singleton pretty heavily.
And that's a great point, yeah. Very heavily breaking Singleton, but in like a very curated way. So it's like, hey, here's an effect that he thinks there just needs to be 3 or 4 of. He'll go ahead and do that. It's challenging in that I think you really need to understand those particular deck archetypes in a way that I did not. Another fun thing about this cube is you draft packs of 20, 2 cards at a time, so you just end up with like tons of cards, which again, I think really rewards the players who know how to draft a deep sideboard and like figure out how to find their lane. Among my first picks were Metalworker and Balance, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try and build this like controlling artifact deck and maybe win with like the Rack and things like that, and Howling Mind, just like generate a bunch of card advantage that way, and maybe some Mastercores. That was kind of my plan early in the draft. I knew that was a strategy that I would struggle to find the way to put together, and I was right, and I lost my way and ended up in this white with a little bit of green deck with 2 copies of Academy Rector, 2 copies of Opalescence, a Mirari's Wake, some other enchantments, and multiple Wraths. And I didn't do great. I did get to sometimes do the cool thing of, okay, I'm going to like try to keep you on the back foot, eventually play a Academy Rector and then cast a Wrath, hopefully your creature deck, and I can get out my Opalescence and a couple enchantments. It worked sometimes, but was just really inconsistent. I didn't have a deep sideboard and also didn't have enough other enchantments to really make it work. But I will say, Emma's deck was incredible, so let's talk about that instead. I feel like Emma did this thing which is sort of next level and not just like unshuffling one of those particular prescriptive decks, but managed to pair 2 archetypes together and had like the most powerful affinity deck that I have ever seen in a cube before, but then also Dark Ritual Necropotence for this like second strategy. We had a very weird game
strategy. It's the same strategy, brother. What if you draw all the cards and also they were free?
Yes, great, perfect. We had a very weird game where she had this incredible start, like dumped her entire hand and was just like, yeah, I'm attacking you with Ravager for $1 billion, or something less than 20, but pretty big.
Less than 20, almost $1 billion though.
And then fortunately I had, my deck was a pile. A Grim Monolith to be able to cast my Wrath of God in time to be able to stay in the game, but then never drew a green source. So we just kept drawing and saying go for 8 turns. I finally draw a forest, play it, and start doing something.
And then she draws
Yawgmoth's Will.
Yeah.
Yeah, so her deck was very cool, and I think Joe was very excited to see like something very novel come together in this cube that was extremely powerful and consistent.
Just to clarify for those that maybe don't know, the World Championship decks was a product that Wizards used to make for a pretty narrow range of years, right sort of from like Urza's block through Mirrodin, I think I want to say is when they did it. And basically, like when a player won the World Championships, it wasn't even winning. They kind of handpicked from the top 8 a couple of decks that they thought were interesting. They basically handpicked some top 8 decks from the World Championships. They would reprint them and sell them as a like product you could just buy off the shelf. But because these decks contained the most powerful cards at the time, they would have been really expensive if they were to acknowledge the secondary market. And so instead, they printed them non-tournament legal with a different back, a gold border, and I think very coolly, a signature in the same gold color of the player that designed and played that deck in the World Championships on the front of the card, which I think is a really cool little piece of information that is naturally included in the printings in that cube, because if you don't really know what's going on and you're like, well, I don't know these old decks, you can look at the ones that have the same signatures and they kind of go together, even if they're in different colors or whatever. Like it clues you into like how these decks might be like combined.
That is a level of paying attention that I'm not close to.
Interesting. I feel like you're the one that reads flavor text. How are you reading flavor text and missing the giant signature?
I don't know.
Interesting.
Couldn't tell you.
I think what Emma did it to like great effect, like maybe one of the best examples of this, but every time I've played this cube, that has kind of been what everyone's doing. Like, you're not really just unshuffling the constructed decks.
I mean, not me, to be fair.
Well, you did combine two decks, just two decks that didn't work at all.
Sapperling Burst.
You did the Opalescence Metalworker combination, which is a little bit suspect.
The Metalworker didn't end up in my deck, to be clear.
Sure, fair.
I pivoted after 6 picks or so.
I think doing artifact things in that cube is very strong because there are like 3 or 4 artifact decks that are all somehow care about artifacts, right? There's like a big wildfire deck. There's, I think, 1 or maybe 2 different World Championship decks that are about affinity. I think artifacts is like a good place to be as a baseline in that cube. It's just like, yeah, try doing artifacts because there's a bunch of cards in there that kind of support those strategies. And like, the cube is very beautiful and it's very cool to see all those World Championship cards all in the same place. Then we had a big lunch of various meats and onions and fried doughs. We loved it. I came back to the venue and there was technically a like 4th pod you could participate in, but there was some like talk of it costing money. You had to like pay $10 if you wanted to join in the 4th pod through Hedron Network. I never verified if that was true.
More importantly, lunch took too long.
We did end up being at lunch for too long.
So we were like, we're not going to make it by 2. Is that okay? And we all agreed, yes, it's worth it for the various meats and onions.
Worth it for the meats and onions, and we will also figure out. We will definitely figure out how to draft a cube no matter what. Ended up sort of helping a draft of Sacred Geometry happen because there were a couple of people that came up to me and asked if that cube was around and really wanted to play it. So I brought it day 2, so then got them in the pods so they could actually play that cube. There was enough people that I didn't have room for a seat, so I ended up sort of floating and checking out my other cubes. Checking out as in both literally checking them out of the event and also watching people draft 100 Ornithopters. And I'm just going to share what I was thinking in this moment. And Chris, if you're listening, I want you to know that I think your format is very cool, and I think you were very cool and respectful and normal about it. But here's what happened. Chris is the designer of the Dichotomy Cube, which we've talked about in this cube years and years ago. It was at the very first Cubecon. It was a cube that was sleeved in black and white sleeves and was entirely black and white cards, and the sleeve matched the card, which meant that your deck, if you were playing 2 colors, which most people were, you could see from the sleeves which colors were white, which colors were black, and same for plains and swamps. Very strange experiment that meant like, okay, you can see your opponent's mono black. How does that change your sort of assessment? Or you like are looking at whether you want to keep this opening hand, and you can see that your like top 2 cards are both black. So they're either swamps or black cards. So if you need that swamp, you're more likely to have it on top. Like weird sort of layers of stuff that I don't think they would allow at Cubecon now, but year 1 was kind of the Wild West. And Chris came up and introduced himself to me and said, we met before. I was the person that designed this cube. And he was like, on day 1, he was like, I have this format I really want you to play if we have time, and I want your feedback on it. And I'll be honest, when someone approaches me at an event like this, first of all, I'm already kind of like over-socialized at these events because there's a lot of people that I'm seeing that are like old friends. That's already a lot of socializing. And there's also a lot of people that are just fans of the podcast that, know me, but I don't know them, that, want to say something to me or chat. And I'm so happy to do it, but it is draining. I'm like, these weekends are kind of exhausting because it's just a lot of socializing. And when someone specifically says they want feedback on something, I like mildly panic. It's mostly because I think people probably have expectations for like what they want from me in that moment. And I worry I'm not going to be able to give them what they want from me, either because I don't have enough time to do it. I don't have like the time to sit down and really engage with it to like give them the kind of thorough feedback they're like hungry for. Or honestly, I'm worried a lot that like my feedback will be pretty critical. I'm kind of a Scrooge, and I think most things are bad. And so if you've like designed a new thing and you want feedback on it, my feedback might not be like fun, lighthearted, like this is really cool and I love it. It might be like, I kind of think a lot of these things are like fundamentally flawed, if I'm honest. And I can't not be honest because I'm broken. It's hard for me to like just be like normal and like friendly about things. So I panicked a little when Chris was like, on Saturday, he was like, I really want you to find someone to play this format this weekend. And I was like, cool, if I have time and like there's a moment, like I'm totally down. And then I secretly hoped there would never be time because I wouldn't then have to like engage in this social, bear trap of like, how do you give feedback to this person that you don't really know, but like kind of knows you, that makes them feel good and supported and encouraged in their creative pursuits, but also is honest, like just kind of it's a lot.
Okay, this is a lot of context you're setting up here.
Well, it is, because during this second draft, I did not have a seat in Sacred Geometry because it was like full up. And so I like went and did some other things and like, saw some friends, spent too much money at the vendors, checked out Take 5, which didn't fire in the last draft of the weekend. And then there was this moment where I was just kind of sitting there, hanging out, watching people play Sacred Geometry. And Chris was like, hey, it's time to play this format.
It's time.
Play my format right now. And I was like, I have no excuse. I will play your format.
Well played.
And I was nervous for all the same reasons, but here's what ended up happening. I was sitting across from Bobby, a local member of our play group. Love Bobby. Bobby's great. Bobby enthusiastically hopped in and just agreed to like sit down and play this thing with me. You were standing there. Other people were standing around. And I think enough people were standing around that also knew that this was kind of my hell. Because Chris sits down and he goes, here we go. Here's my format. It's like BattleBox.
It's a normal game of Magic.
Well, yes, it's a stack of cards sitting in front of us, and I could see there were 3 different kinds of sleeves in the stack.
Plus some other assistance cards mixed in.
And Chris, like, at the beginning is very eager to be like, it's really simple. It's just a game of Magic. There's nothing complicated or weird except for one rules change.
One simple rules change.
And the rules change is that whenever you would draw a card, you instead Winston draft from the top of this pile. And I'm not going to go into detail about what Winston draft is. I'm not going to try to explain this in great detail. I'm just going to express the general shape of it so you can understand the complexity here.
You're laying out multiple stacks of cards. The stacks get bigger and you get to choose one.
Anthony immediately doing the thing I said I wasn't going to do. Yes.
I think that general layout is important to understand.
So instead of drawing a card, you Winston draft from the top of this blind stack. And when you choose to draft a card from the Winston draft or a stack of cards, you don't put them into your hand. You instead essentially have an omniscience emblem, and you must cast and or play every card in that stack, and you're allowed to do it at instant speed and violate all casting restrictions and put multiple lands into play. You must do it, and if you fail to do it for whatever reason, you lose the game. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty big difference. And then we were like, so we both draw opening hands of 7? And he was like, no, not that. I'm like, so that's another way that the rules are different. And I was
normal Magic, one simple change.
And I was like, what happens if we go to because you can basically choose to skip all 3 piles in a Winston draft and then just draw randomly from the top of the deck. And I was like, so if I do that and I just draw a card I can't play, I lose the game. He's like, well, no. Then you get to actually put that card into your hand and draw it. And I was like, okay. So it was funny because I think everyone was in a good mood. We were all kind of like clowning around, and every time I would ask a clarifying question, it would be clear there's actually another like small rules modification here. There's more things that are kind of different than you would expect. And I had so much fun playing this like silly game. Basically, the stack is in these like 3 sections so that the first cards are like pretty bad and dinky and there's a lot of lands, and the second section the cards get better, and we didn't get to that third section in any of our exhibition matches, but he said that the third section, like those cards just end the game, one way or the other. I'm not going to dissect this from a game design perspective here, just to say that like I had an incredible time doing this. It was so much fun. I think specifically the context of being surrounded by people that were like all at the end of a long weekend in good spirits, kind of clowning around, and like having Chris like enthusiastically explain these rules, and me and Bobby go like, holy crap, that's a lot. And then like trying to do
somebody
these moves.
Being forced to put lure on their wall because that's the rule. You have to do it.
Yeah, you have to cast lure because you wanted the other card in that pile, so you have to do it. And there's a couple really interesting things about like the conceit that if I were to play it a lot more, I might have some interesting feedback about. Like, I thought it was really interesting that in the second chapter, there were some counterspells. And the counterspells are awful in this format because they just mean that you have to counter one of your own spells in the stack because you must cast every spell in the stack, otherwise you lose the game, and your opponent's never got anything in the stack during this moment. So basically you like are Winston drafting a pile of 3 and you're like, well, I have to counter one of them because one of them's a counter spell. So I only get one of these cards actually. Or in the case of one of my like game winning moments, I got to mana leak my own spell and pay for it because I needed the spell to resolve. And so like I was forced to cast mana leak on my own spell, and then I paid for it, and that was enough to like get me across the finish line. A bunch of weird old cards: Dirkwood, Boars, Dirkwood or Duskwood. Some Boars was one of the best cards in Chapter 1.
5 mana, 4/5 or something.
Yeah, War Mammoths, 4 mana, 3/3 trample was OP, and I had to reflect and be like, maybe I should be less Scroogey about these things because I just had a great time. It was really fun, and I would say like a highlight of the weekend was those moments. Everyone laughing and clowning around playing playing that format. So shout out to Chris for putting it together. And Chris, I hope that my explanation of my inner life when you approached me about doing it does not make you feel any type of way, because it's not about you, buddy. It's all about me.
Yeah, definitely a highlight of the weekend. It's like a weird, quirky format, but I think especially in that context of just like, yeah, we're going to just see what we get. Like nobody knowing what you would draw.
Yeah. The fact that Bobby and I had absolutely no clue what was in this deck also made our decisions like almost impossible. Like it's like, okay, well, I get to cast this spell for free.
Is that good?
Is
that enough?
Is this on average a good spell? Or is the next two piles going to be on average better? Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things about like it being so casual and just like go crazy with it. And I think, and Chris would know better than I, and I have not played it enough to know, but like whether it's like a dynamic, replayable, like good game design or not, it's such a cool example of like using Magic game pieces to do something that truly barely resembles Magic.
You were attacking with a war mammoth. That sounds like regular Magic to me.
It's just the fact that counterspells were just huge. Like they were basically trap cards. Like counterspells played in that like the Slay the Spire junk cards that can get put into your deck, where it's like this is just actively horrible. You never want it, which was pretty interesting.
From a design perspective, is also important because it makes the drafting much more dynamic, and you're not just like always taking the first pile, because that means you're giving your opponent the least resources. So like I think that they are not only fun but also kind of important.
That's why I don't feel confident making any kind of assessment about because I played it so little. But yes, I think probably. Do you want to talk about your Sacred Geometry draft? Does it matter? Basically, is there anything of note from that draft that you would want to touch on?
It was another 2-1, which landed me in perfectly 50% win rate. That's where I am these days, and I guess I'm okay with it. I do wish I allocated some of those into some 3-0s, but so it goes. I drafted a mostly red with a little bit of a white splash deck in Sacred Geometry, and I just had so many goblins, and that was awesome. I loved playing a bunch of goblins and War Leader's Call and Goblin Bombardment, and 2-1.
It was kind of funny that
it worked.
Alex was a little like jovially salty during this draft, just at like how things had played out.
Pretty salty.
Well, yeah, but to me, there's like such a difference between like you had a couple salty opponents over the weekend, or at least one that was
just
like
genuinely like, I'm not having a good time, and I'm not.
And just like bringing the whole like vibe down.
Yeah.
Alex was just like, hamming it up about how unlucky he was getting, and like was genuinely salty, but also in a way that wasn't affecting everyone else's mood. Was like he kind of was opening the door for people to like also make fun of him. And it was very funny that he like finally got off to a good start in the game against you, and then you weren't drawing up planes for a long time. I mean, you did draw planes, you played a War Leader's Call, but he immediately like removed your creatures, so you stopped getting tokens from Baird and like kind of like stabilized the board. No, that wasn't exactly right. He stabilized the board. Then the next turn you went Baird Hordling Outburst, take 4, take another one from Baird, and he was like, great, well that sucks. And then you drew off the top Siege Gang Commander, and we're like, take 4 more, and then another one from Baird, and just like had an incredible sequence.
It was great. Very clever on my part to draw those cards in that order.
The last highlight of the event for me was that we had 3 players from our local playgroup in the top 8, or a pretty good chunk of the field, but that's more than a like representative chunk of the top 8 from. We didn't have whatever percent, like 36% of the players at the entire Cube event.
Right, which given how close it was a little bit surprising. There were a lot of new faces.
Here's what I'll say about the Cubecon events. Like, I talked to people from Florida. I talked to people from Atlanta. I talked to people, Joe came from California. Like, it was a small event. It was, like, smaller than other East Coast Corridor Cube events that have happened in recent memory. But the Cubecon name does bring in, they have an audience of, like, that's much bigger than anybody running, like, a little local Cube event, which is kind of interesting. People will travel across the country for this. And I'm like, you could probably just go to this in your own city, but from a different organizer, maybe. Either way, I thought it was cool that, like, it brought people in from all over the place. But we had overrepresentation in the top 8 because Baltimore Cube scene is nasty. We're so good here. We're so good, such good players. And, you and I have talked many times about how we do not care about the competitive aspect of these events and would, forego it most of the time if given the option. But I got to say, it was cool to have 3 players in the top 8. And 2 of our players got knocked out in round 1, but Michael won round 1, won round 2, and then went to the finals. And I was so excited to cheer for Michael, and we all gathered around the feature match area. And this was not streamed, but it was filmed, and I think Chris is going to put the videos out. They said before Cubecon Prime, which is happening at the end of August. So in the next 4 weeks, these videos will come out. When they do, we'll try and mention it on the show and link it from show notes. But Michael is a lovely guy who's been really active in the playgroup and showed up very consistently for probably about a year-ish, I would say now. Maybe a little longer. I'm kind of bad at time, so sorry, Michael, if I get that wrong. I think Michael himself would not have identified as the best Magic player in the group. Like, there's a few people that are like known spikes where it's like your Julians, RIP Julian moved to France, but your Julians, I think Max is like a known sort of cube spike person. And most of us are kind of in this category of like, yeah, we're here to have fun. And I think Michael was in the here to have fun category of people, but finds himself in the top 8 in the finals and does pull off the win. Playing the regular cube, we get to watch him win in the finals and have everyone go crazy. And I definitely like felt a little emotional at just like how cool this community we've built is, and seeing Michael go and win the finals, and like Michael was such a kind guy and was like talking in the Discord about how the way every single individual person had like helped him, either directly or indirectly on his journeys to get to the top 8. And, the group of friends that then, surrounded him for his like top 8 photo, where it's like these people you would never know from like different walks of life, from like different age ranges, like just such a cool community that we've built here. And, I don't care about the competitive stuff unless my friends win, then I love it. I think it's very cool. It's competitive.
Yeah, it was very cool. And I think that he was both surprised that, he was very focused on the game, and this little circle of people had gathered while he was like totally not aware of it, totally locked in, and then we all just kind of went wild when the game ended, and he was just like, what's going on? And I talked to him after, he was like, that was just surreal. Like, what? I'm not a person that wins. Like, what's going on here? And it's like, no, that's not true anymore.
You literally are a person that wins.
That was very, very exciting to see.
Yeah, loved it.
I think I have to feel good that Max drafting the Boros heroic deck did not take it all down. That was probably a good thing for that cube.
We were all a little worried because Max won Boston Cube Party last month, and we were like, Max can't go back-to-back cube event trophies and also do it with Red White Heroic in the regular cube. Anyway, another great event. Put it in the books. There's many more coming up the world over, so check out the events page on the website if you want to have as much fun as Anthony and I had this weekend.
But that reminds me of the other highlight, which I wasn't even there for. Do you want to share the story of somebody in the regular cube being very disappointed?
Well, that was the intro to the podcast everyone already heard. It was a really fun part of the weekend for me. Is in the Jarvis Yube, I finished my match 1 against my opponent pretty quickly because I was playing this aggro deck. We had some time to chill, and I was asking them, like, what other Magic do you play? Did you draft something else this weekend? He was like, yeah, just like Cube. I've got this like 720 like double-powered vintage cube. It's like my baby back home, and, I just love playing the most powerful cards. And he's like, yeah. So I like came to this event, and he was working with one of the vendors during some of the hours, and during other times he was like drafting, and he was like, yeah. So I like checked it out, and I was like, I just want to do like a typical cube draft. So I saw a regular cube, and I was like, I'm in. I just want a regular cube. Then he goes, and that thing was anything but regular, and he starts like ranting, and eventually I stopped him, and like the one you heard as the intro was like me asking him, could you just say all that again so I can get it on tape? And of course it's not as good the second time he says it. It feels a little contrived, but he was just like, he expected regular cube to be a vintage powered cube, and was like, What is this trash? What are these garbage cards? How dare you call this the regular cube?
Perfect. I mean, I think that cube can be retired now. It's succeeded in its weird, perverse goals.
Hang its jersey in the rafters.
I'm curious what he ended up drafting then, and I hope he had a good time regardless.
I don't know what he ended up drafting in the cube. It doesn't sound like he had a good time. No, I think he had a bad time.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but
I mean, expectations are everything. Like,
absolutely.
Even if the cube is great, like if this guy just wanted to, play power and opened up, I don't know, what's the worst card in the regular cube these days? You cut Court Homunculus or whatever.
I don't know, just some bad card.
When he did open up his 4 prismatic vistas, and he was like, what is this? This is not normal. And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This show is brought to you by, that's not what I say. All the music for this podcast is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by our dear friend Matthew. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and speaking to microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for another great Cube event. Until the next one.
Woo!
Or tonight. Tuesday Cube.
Tonight. The next one is tonight.
The next one is now.